Preparation for a NATO summit takes months of work at all levels within the alliance. For Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, it has meant numerous public engagements, negotiations and meetings with allies and partners to make sure that the Chicago summit on May the 20th and 21st goes smoothly. During April, as the final preparations were being made for the summit, the Secretary-General visited Afghanistan to meet with the Afghan president and security officials who have been working to train the Afghan National Security Forces. As these forces get stronger and better trained, it is hoped that by the end of 2014 they will be completely in charge of the country's security. A detailed roadmap for this transition and NATO's continued commitment to Afghanistan post-2014 is one of the main items for discussion at the summit. Preparations for the summit began in August last year, but events picked up pace as Allied foreign and defence ministers arrived in NATO headquarters in April. Over the 2 days of this jumbo ministerial, most of the final negotiations and preparations for the summit took place. For the Secretary-General, meetings between allies, as well as with partners and individual bilateral meetings between nations, meant long hours at the office. This was necessary to make sure that everything on the Chicago agenda could be achieved. And even after all of those meetings, more meetings with the press were needed to explain the summit's key priorities of Afghanistan, NATO's future capabilities and work with partners. 1 week after national ministers went home, the Secretary-General began visiting various allies for final negotiations and meetings. This time it meant a police escort from Madrid airport to meetings with the President of the government, so that no time was wasted. There were, of course, more interviews with the Spanish press to explain why the summit is important, not just for NATO as a whole, but also for Spain. As soon as the meetings are finished, it's back on the road to the next destination. On the plane, final preparations for the next meeting in Italy take place with NATO colleagues. Even though meetings are constant at this point, it is important to take a break and exercise. In order to keep up with the hectic schedule and long days, the Secretary-General makes a point of staying healthy. Another day, and the first of 3 official meetings in Rome with the Italian president and government officials. More press interviews also take place as interest builds in the summit's key topics. Phone calls back to NATO headquarters keep the hundreds of staff working there on summit preparations up to date with discussions. Everyone, including the Belgian military crew who manned the plane, are working non-stop by the end of April to make sure that the summit happens without a hitch. But before Chicago, more travelling and meetings need to take place, this time in London, for meetings with the UK Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign Affairs. Following these discussions, the Secretary-General met with the British press in Downing Street and was interviewed by Sky News before heading back to Brussels. The next trip is to Germany for meetings with the German Chancellor and government officials. The Secretary-General also visited the Mauer Museum and Checkpoint Charlie while in Berlin. The final visit to Washington DC and the White House took place in early May and included meetings with President Obama and his closest advisors in the famed Oval Office. Summit preparations are now nearly complete, and staff at every level, both in NATO headquarters and in many countries around the world, are working long hours to make sure that everything that can be delivered in Chicago will be delivered smoothly.